think we'd like to start by first thanking Gary Melius and the owner of Oheka Castle and Oheka Castle for giving us this wonderful venue to have this event today. And also thank our one of our directors, Vinny Levian, over here for helping us to make this happen. Yesterday we had a historic event at the United Nations, and these speakers, we're missing one, but these speakers appeared discussing the actions of the Holy See during World War II and the life-saving actions it took on a very, very important day, which was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp. So it was a very, very important day, but unfortunately we only had 3 hours to do the event. And to give you an example, many of these people were with us in Rome. In 2008, we had 3 days to do it, so it was much different. But we asked the audience to submit questions, which a little bit later on we're going to try to respond to. We were not able to respond yesterday because of we ran out of time, unfortunately. But there are certain subjects here that are very, very critical, very, very important, that we would like to cover. And the first one I think I'd like to talk about is what happened on October 16th, 1943, which was the roundup of the Jews of Rome. Now, just to give you a preliminary, the chief rabbi of Rome at the time, Zoli, had decided that because the Nazis were occupying Rome, that they should destroy all of the records of the membership, and they should dismiss the staff, pay them in full, and lock the synagogue up. But the head of the Jewish community at that time, his name was Foa, didn't want to do that. And so when the Nazis came in, they just went to the synagogue and they got the names and addresses of all of the Jews of Rome, which was not the right thing to do. But unfortunately, this is how this event started. But right now we have our experts have all done massive amounts of research on this. And I think, Michael, you had a lot of conversations with Father Gumpel, who is the relator to the causes and one of the most respected intellects in Rome, and also at age 94 now, right?
96.
96 was in Rome at the time. Would you talk about the events that occurred that day? And we may all chime in when we think of something else, that starting from Princess Pignatelli, when they started the arrest of the Roman Jews. I think it was at 5 in the morning?
Actually, it was very early in the morning. Princess Pignatelli learned about it and verified this claim, and she got a car with a driver of the German embassy, ironically, and asked him to bring her to the Pope, because in the night it was not allowed to drive any private car in Rome. Only German military and embassy cars were allowed. So she got immediately into the Apostolic Palace. She was known there, and came in when Pope Pius just finished his early morning Holy Mass. And still in the sacristy, she told him what she learned, what is going on, and he immediately reacted, immediately having tears in his eyes, and said, "Oh my God, they promised not to arrest the Jews." This was a promise by the Nazis. They promised the Jewish community of Rome, if they deliver 50 kilograms of gold, they would not deport and arrest and deport the 8,000 Roman Jews. Kappler got all the gold. The Vatican offered to deliver 25 kilograms. At the end, Catholic communities from all of Rome collected the money, so the Vatican didn't have to do it, but was willing to do it. And then suddenly, 2 weeks later, the razzia happened on the Black Shabbat on the 16th of October, 1943. So he was completely shocked. He had tears in his eyes, and he immediately called his Secretary of State, Cardinal Maleone, to act and to call in the German ambassador to the Holy See, von Weizsäcker. And von Weizsäcker was, well, not the most straightforward person in the diplomatic corps. He gave the Vatican the idea of a sympathy, and indeed later he claimed after the war that he was a part of the resistance network, which is not really proven. At least he did not show a lot of resistance. And in his letters to Berlin, he deliberately lied a couple of times. So he is a very controversial figure. Anyway, Cardinal Maleone clearly said, if you don't stop the arrest, the Pope is going to protest, and it will cause a lot of damage to our relations. And Weizsäcker said, please don't ask me to report this to Berlin. And everybody knew, they knew in the Vatican because they were informed by benevolent circles within the German intelligence community, the Abwehr, Admiral Canaris, and his staff. But Hitler gave the order to arrest the Pope, to invade the Vatican and arrest the Pope and bring him to Liechtenstein, or even to kill the Pope when he protests in public against the treatment of the Jews, against the Holocaust. People say today, of course, this was not the terminology of his time. So, from Weizsäcker said, I will try my best to stop it, but please don't let me report that the Pope is going to protest. And so Maleone said, okay, but do the best to stop it. And Weizsäcker went home and did nothing. The Pope knew it. He didn't trust von Weizsäcker. So he sent his nephew, Carlo Pacelli, who was his right hand, to a German-Austrian bishop, the head of the German-Austrian National Church, Santa Maria dell'Anima in Rome, Alois Hudal, who was originally a persona non grata because he wanted a dialogue between National Socialism and the Catholic Church, and he believed there are some good elements in National Socialism we can use, and so the Pope was completely against him, but in this moment they knew he had close contact to some German officers, and some German officers liked him a lot, so he could be helpful. So Carlo Pacelli said, now you have to do as a man of the church, a favor to the church, a favor to the Pope, write a letter to the German town commander, General Stahel, and ask him to stop what is going on, the arrest, the razzia, the arrest of the Roman Jews. So Stahel, and we have a testimony under oath from a high-ranking officer of his staff, who later became a general, General Belitz, who testified in front of Father Gumpel, the relator of the beatification process of Pius XII, and confirmed that Stahel immediately called Heinrich Himmler. Himmler was not an expert in military things, so when General Stahel said, we have to stop it right now because there's the danger, maybe even in papal protest, but the danger that the Romans revolt. And we need the cooperation of the Romans because we have the frontier very close and we can't supply them with goods when we have a revolt in Italy. We lose the control over the Italian population if we continue, and when the Pope protests and we do something against the Pope, this is impossible. So Himmler immediately ordered to stop the Judenaktion, the arrests. At 12 high noon, according to the diary of Field Marshal Kesselring, who was the high commander of the German troops in Rome. Originally, the first day action was planned until 4 afternoon, and another day of arrests and deportations was planned. But it stopped in the middle. And next day, Stahel informed Hudal, Bishop Hudal, but he spoke to Himmler and that everything will go well. We have the testimony of Hudal in a written form. He sent a report to the Vatican. It's now in the Vatican Secret Archives, but we located a copy of it in the archives of Santa Maria dell'Anima. Johann X was the one who showed me the way to it, and we found something else. Another document, another report by Hudal, but a couple of days later, Stahel issued 500 documents guaranteeing immunity for possessions, for property of the Vatican all over Rome. What was used, it was put in front of the doors or on the doors of the Roman monasteries. And Pope Pius XII sent a circular to the heads of the Roman monasteries, of the religious orders. We have to help the Jews. And actually it was announced in Osservatore Romano, La Carità del Santo Padre was the headline, but the Holy Father is granting charity to everybody independent from its race and religion. That was a very clear sign on the official paper. So this was the reason why from the 8,000 or more Roman Jews, 8,000 Roman Jews plus a couple of hundred refugees, only, and the number is horrible enough, 1,030 were eventually sent to Auschwitz. In the original order it was said they should go to Mauthausen, which was a work camp, not a death camp in Austria near Linz, as hostages. This was the information which was also given to the Holy See by Weizsäcker. Oh yeah, we know about it as hostages. But Eichmann, as he testified in the trial in Jerusalem, was so annoyed about what had happened that he ordered the train to go directly to Auschwitz, and nearly all of them were killed. 16 survived. This was one point. The other point was when Himmler learned that the Vatican was behind it, he immediately, by the end of October, ordered Stahel to be removed from Rome and sent to the front. And he became a prisoner of war of the Russians and died in a POW camp in Russia a couple of years later in the 1950s. So he paid with his life for what he did, but Pope Pius was able to give shelter to more than 4,000 Roman Jews in all the monasteries, plus a couple of hundred in the Vatican, plus Catholics helping other Jews to find a place to hide. In the following, so 80% of the Roman Jews deserve their life, over life, to this action of Pius XII. So he was not silenced, but behind the scenes, he did the most efficient thing.
He also was the only one that could lift cloister, because men were allowed then to go into convents and women into monasteries, and only the Pope could have done that. Professor Husson.
Yes, just wanted to add or to underline two important points. The first one is that it's not only that Weizsäcker didn't keep his promise, it's that what he wrote to Berlin was wrong and false, and that it has been the basis of Rolf Hochhuth's analysis and black legend about what happened in Rome. The second aspect, I think we should also stress that, is that you understand why Pius was very cautious about speaking publicly, because this was a one-shot weapon. And he's able to threaten the Germans, and he would have certainly spoken if there had been no success of the intervention of Rudel, but it was a one-shot weapon. Yeah. So he had to keep it as the ultima ratio, I would say. I just wanted to insist on that. This is extremely important.
This is a very, very important point. And the fact is that there was a reason that when General Belitz listened in on the conversation of Stahel to Himmler, he said to him, "You 384 troops to arrest the Jews of Rome, which is normally not a problem, but you're expecting that," he said, that the Allies have full air superiority, and the locals are picking us off at night, and so on, and you're expecting me to supply the troops fighting down south, which I cannot do. You're going to have to assume responsibility. And that was what prompted Himmler to order the arrest for special purposes. But that's a very, very important point, because when we'll get into the discussion of the invasion plan, which Michael touched on, this was absolutely petrified. The military was petrified of this. Why? Because they knew that if the Pope were arrested, there would be riots all over Europe, and they would have to put down the riots while trying to do carry out their mission. And this would have been a devastating thing. So they did everything to dissuade Hitler from actually ordering this arrest. But they knew that if the Pope spoke out, it would have been an automatic. And we have that from Colonel Kunkel, I think, was interviewed as well many years ago. He said, and he was a military right there in Rome, and he said, we were waiting any day for the invasion plan to go into the Rome. And I think we should touch on that. Colonel?
Yeah, I wanted some, clarification on this intervention of Houdal. Because many times we hear speaking of him, in fact, as a persona non grata, as you said, and it's true, from 38 on, he was seen in another light on, let's say, the internal Roman ecclesiastical life. That means he had he wanted to do the Te Deum at the day at the Anschluss with Austria, and of course the Secretary of State intervened and prohibited him to do that. Now, Houdal had these national aspirations, but he was not a Nazi. Not at all. He was not.
As an Austrian.
He was an Austrian national thinking person. But on the other hand, what we don't say often is that Houdal was let's say, a primary part in the escape line of Rome. And he managed, in fact, from also the Holy Office, there was a bureau who, manufactured passports and all kinds of documents. Now Houdal was their consultor. It's easy to think. And on the other hand, Houdal was very acquainted with O'Flaherty. They saw each other at breakfast in Campo Santo Teutonico, where they had mass together even. So all these things bring to see that Houdal is a very controversial figure. He had these good acquaintances with the Germans, and we know that, and he had good acquaintances also with the escape line, or he was in favor and he was active in this escape line. And we know even that all kinds of people were hiding in his Pontifical Institute. Now, one can say that, after the war, he was doing the same thing for others. And that's, of course, his drama. His tragedy is this. What we didn't know until today, but we know since a few months, as I can say, that Houdal was, in fact, let's say, he entered the secret service of the Americans without knowing it, because it was the OSS, right after the war, very well informed about his psychology and about his activity as a priest, who charged him, in fact, he didn't know that, and he died without knowing it. But it was the OSS to put him into, a network.
So knowing him, they influenced him, is how that happened? They influenced him to do this?
No, they just
made it possible. They used him.
Yeah, they used him. So
he was an unwitting.
It was what we say the convent line, the line of the convents.
The rat line.
The rat line, and later on the rat line. Is the point in Rome was Houdal for them, and he was scheduled by the OSS, and there is a file on this operation. Now, what I found out, at the other hand, and this is in the, let's say, the documents on the Barbie process, and, nobody goes and read these things, but if you read them well, at a certain moment, there is a testimony who says that in 1947, they disappeared from Rome. Now,
the OSS?
Yeah, all of a sudden. And it is clear there was one who was at the alcohol, and he was a risk for the whole operation. So they had an order from Washington, withdrawal immediately withdraw from Italy, all of you. And that means that this escape line, the rat line after the war, all of a sudden was, an orphan rat line, because the members of the OSS were away. Now, it was probably the first and only operation that worked, that the CIA, OSS, ever since set up, because it worked for years and years and years further.
Yeah, there's a very important point with this, because many of the revisionists who have made up these films and these make-believe documentaries, one's coming out now, I understand, a documentary coming out now, the imagery of the media shows the rat line, and they talk about the rat line per se. Then they show an image of Pius XII being held on a throne as though he were directing it. In other words, all the negativity that happened during the war, they focus on Pius XII. All the positive, they now attribute to each bishop and priest who did it. But this is a very, very important point.
I would like to add something on that. And Ron Rychlak is the man who could say that I'm right or not. But Houdal had a campaign, an anti-campaign against him right in these years before Pius XII, and that was, for me, it was, let's say, the appetizer for that what was coming on Pius XII. They needed a scapegoat in the Vatican, a Nazi, to come to say that the Pope was Hitler's Pope.
Yeah.
And they did that perfectly, and it worked, because if you see that the newspapers that are, in fact, let's say, propagating this idea that Houdal was, you know, a Nazi. The Nazis were under us, and then with his photo, the man was still alive. You can imagine how that feels. Now, and in that way, of course, they created a scapegoat in the Vatican, and that was the proof that also the Pope was, you know, covering and defending Nazis.
But, you know, there's that point, I remember you had even brought this up, that Houdal brought 400 or so Austrians to an audience with the Pope to show the position that the Pope had. And the Pope said, well, actually he said, Mother Pascalina came out to Houdal and said, if you stay here, the Pope will not come out. Because he despised him, essentially.
No, I don't think that I told it like that. The question, no, the problem with Houdal was also a personal question between Pasqualina and himself. Right. And Pasqualina had a lot of power.
As the housekeeper of Pius XII.
She was the housekeeper of Pius XII. And between them, really, it didn't work, between Houdal and Pasqualina. And I think that Pasqualina in that moment was also, you know, taking a little bit, you know, possession of a role by keeping him out. But it was a fact that also the Secretary of State and the Pope itself took distances from Houdal.
They didn't want anything to do with him.
They didn't want anything to do, because they were aware that, of course, after the war, he was doing things that, you know, they were not agreeing 100%.
Can I mention one? I just thank you so much for your very enlightening comments. Just a few things on the Roman Roundup. What has always struck me is when the Italian princes who first alerted to Pope Pius XII on that dire morning of October 16th, 1943, when the Nazis raided Rome's Jewish community, she said she had to intervene during his holiest hour when he was praying, and instantly, the moment she went in there, usually he was very involved in his prayer. Instantly, the moment she went in there and told the Pope what was happening, he immediately rose and turned, and he said, let's go make a few phone calls, let's go into action. So the speed and the rapidity of the way Pope Pius XII acted owes a great deal to his character. This was not some kind of slow-moving, aloof Pope. He went into immediate action. And I should also point out that we know from testimonies of people who knew and worked with Pope Pius XII at the time, that he was giving direct actions to people. Just cite two. There was Cardinal Poladezza, a famous Jesuit, who wrote a famous article in the Osservatore Romano in 1964, after the notorious Holocaust plague, which has since been discredited, in which Dezza says, when he was in conversation with the Pope, Pius XII told him explicitly to do everything he could to help the persecuted Jews, particularly those that were being targeted by the Nazis. And secondly, I myself had a on-the-record recorded interview with the great Irish priest, Monsignor John Patrick Carroll Abbing. And as Ron Rychlak can testify, I interviewed him on the record, and he told me personally, he was a special envoy of the Pope, I took direct face-to-face instructions from Pius XII to rescue persecuted Jews during the German occupation and anytime they were in danger. And when I published this, of course, people came out and said, oh, he's lying, he's lying. What they didn't know is that I had on the record, and with the permission of Monsignor Carol Abing, tape recorded the conversation. I played it for many of my colleagues, including Professor Rishlak, and I sent it to the Vatican. So we have on record. And lastly, we have diaries now, we have documents showing how the Nazis and Nazi officials were were aware of the Vatican's rescue efforts and were obstructing it. The last thing that has always fascinated me, Adolf Eichmann, widely considered one of the architects of the notorious Final Solution, when he was on trial, he was writing his diaries. Now, at the time, Israel, for understandable reasons, did not want to release them because they didn't want to give any kind of sympathetic portrait of this monster of a human being. But years and years later, they finally published the diaries for historical purposes. And part of the diaries show that Eichmann, one of the architects of the Final Solution, was outraged at the Vatican for obstructing the deportation of Rome's Jews. So both his friends and his loyal supporters testify to his action and his concern for the Jews of Rome, and his enemies do from the opposite direction as well.
I think Professor Husson has a comment.
Yes, just want to add something which is very interesting coming from our conversation. Yesterday, the whole story of the communist manipulation was reminded to the audience by Ron Rishlak. I think that if we want to have the full picture, we have to understand that this was the Eastern manipulation. In the West, there was the scapegoating phenomenon. I mean, this is what we have mentioned. Weizsäcker, he wanted to get clean out of the whole thing, so he accused Pius. The Allies hadn't done anything. So the best way was at the end to accuse him, and this is exactly what we have said about the rat line. This was something the Americans manipulated, yes. But the scapegoat, the easy scapegoat, was the Vatican. And I think this is very important to have the two sides of the medal really in mind. There was. With the first trial, and then, but from the 1960s, the success of the communist manipulation on one side. On the other side, everything was ready in the West because you needed a scapegoat.
One last
This
thing.
is the best moment.
Sure.
This is the very best reason why Pius XII got this slanderous reputation. Because when did Hochholz play come out, 1963, this was when we had the first generation after the war becoming adult. So young generation asked the fathers in Germany, what did you do to help the Jews? What did you do to stop Hitler? And so the perfect excuse was, look, even the Pope couldn't do anything, even the Pope was silent. What could I, little whatever, lawyer, businessman, whatever, could do against it? And in the same way, it became the great scapegoat for the governments, because what did the governments do? When in 1939, Eugenio Pacelli, even before he became Pope as Secretary of State, requested 200,000 visa for the Jews, the reaction of the governments was ridiculous. You only got a couple of thousand visas from mostly Latin American countries. When the Holocaust was known to the Allies and to many foreign governments, we had one Allied protest on the 17th of December in 1942. Nothing else afterwards. Then we learned the details about what is going on in Auschwitz. Nothing was told the public. So we had at least 3 people protest at the very same time when we had one from the Allied forces who didn't have anything to fear. So for all those governments, it was the perfect excuse. Well, we didn't say anything, but
They didn't
even the Pope didn't say anything. Even the Pope didn't protest. Well, but the Pope acted, and this is the big difference. The Pope acted.
You should mention also that the 200,000 visas they asked for was 3 weeks after Kristallnacht. Nobody else did a thing.
2 months.
And then
9th of November 1939.
Then in January he had a second letter. The second letter where he's requesting this help. So that's a very, very important factor, that nobody else was doing anything. And we saw the St. Louis was leaving with thousands of Jews who were coming from Europe, and Roosevelt would not let it land.
One quick point to add. to Professor Hussein's excellent point about scapegoating and what Dr. Hesseman has said, on top of the disgrace of scapegoating Pope Pius XII, you have this phenomenon in more recent years of rebels within the church who, for whatever reason, disagree with a host of Catholic teachings. Okay, put that aside. That's something that they should argue on their own terms. But they suddenly realize, well, one of the ways we can promote our agenda to try to change church teaching in this or that area in which we do is to slander and defame the papacy and weaken it. What better way to do that than to hop on the wagon of the Hitler's Pope myth? I mean, there's no question that many Jewish scholars and historians have pointed out how wrong it is to exploit the tragedy of the Holocaust for Catholic dissidents, rebels, for their own purposes. In other words, they don't like the church teaching on women priests or human sexuality. Again, that's a separate issue. That's an internal church affair. But instead of simply arguing on those issues on their own terms, they dragoon in this whole Hitler's Pope mythology. As they see it, that strengthens their case against the evil, wicked papacy. But it's being done not because they care about the Jewish community and the tragedy, it's because they want to promote their own very secular agenda, which I think is just inexcusable. But I just wanted to add that because you have the scapegoating, and then you have, in more recent years, the rebellious Catholic dissidents coming in and trying to use this myth, which has been discredited in any event, to try to use it to exploit, to push the change. If they have something to say about the Catholic Church and internal reform as they see it, fine. But don't smear Pope Pius XII in the process.
Right. Professor Rishlak.
Well, yeah, and I think what Bill said is absolutely correct. But that was if we accept what I was talking about yesterday, this is a Soviet plot. It's designed, in fact, to make the church crumble. It's designed, in fact, to question our Western ideals. I mean, that's what the disinformation campaign.
I think you should repeat that again, exactly how the Russians did this with the disinformation. Ron's book, Disinformation, was incredible because he interviewed one of the highest-ranking KGB agents ever to defect and has an incredible amount of information, which we discussed yesterday. But this is a very good example of exactly how they maneuver.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and just to be clear, I didn't just interview him. It's a co-authored book,
yes.
Jan Mahai-Pachepa, the highest-ranking defector from the Soviet bloc who ran foreign intelligence from communist Romania. And it's very clear they took this play, they cultivated it, they developed books about it, they had reviews about it, they made sure it was translated and produced. And really, you go back and you look at this, and the play's reception did not justify immediate translation and all the other, I mean, it was not that popular but they kept producing it, kept translating, kept promoting it, writing books about it, and we're finding more and more records that we're tracing Soviet money behind all of these books, and an inordinate number of people who acknowledge communist ties in developing that as it came along the way.
Yeah. There's also a very interesting part about it. It came out in 1963. Coincidentally,
in Germany.
In Germany, coincidentally, the Second Vatican Council was taking place, and that's where the Catholic Church was changing its position on the other religions. And it was like an ideal time to sort of stick something in that.
Well,
but an even more important factor was the beginning of the pontificate of Montini, of Paul VI. Who was Montini?
It was before.
It was before, yes, one moment. Let me explain what happened.
No, it was not a pope.
After Pius XII died, the new Pope, John XXIII, started a new chapter in the Vatican Ostpolitik. After World War II, Pius XII was an extreme anti-communist. The one branch of evil, the Nazis were defeated, the fascists were defeated, but now the biggest danger for Europe was the communist danger. So he was known to be an outspoken anti-communist. So he passed away. Roncalli, John XXIII, was elected, started this new chapter of Vatican Ostpolitik, of dialogue with the Soviet Union. Of course, it was not Stalin anymore, it was Khrushchev, it was a different Soviet Union, but still. The KGB knew that from something like 1961, 1962 on, but he had cancer, stomach cancer. And eventually in June 1963, he died of it. So we knew also that the most promising papabile candidate for being the next pope was Montini, Archbishop of Milano, who was the right hand of Pius XII during the war, during the Holocaust. So by destroying the reputation of Pius XII, they wanted to avoid the election of Pope Paul VI because they were afraid that he would continue the anti-communist policy of Pius XII. They didn't know, but in his heart he was much more liberal, but that's a different point. They were afraid he would continue, he would go back to the anti-communist policy of Pius XII. So they wanted to prevent the election of Montini as Pope by this campaign, and Montini understood it. Before the conclave, 1 week before, he published a great article in the Tablet, a British newspaper, proving Hochhuth wrong in every single instance.
Yeah, no, I skipped that part in my speech yesterday to spare time for the questions because I had it all prepared, but and it's true.
And then the first thing he did when he became Pope was...
He sent that article as a cardinal.
Yeah.
The tablet doesn't publish it.
Right.
No, they don't publish it immediately. He becomes Pope, and they publish it.
I see.
You know, also that.
Yeah, Professor
And the first thing he did when he became Pope is that he ordered the release of the most important documents proving his point by a commission of 4 historians of the Jesuit order, the acts and documents of the Holy See during World War II, which is 11 volumes officially, 12 books, because 1 volume is 2 books, number 3.
Yeah, that was the question.
And then he opened the beatification process.
Yeah, Professor Napolitano, you have a comment?
Yes, in my opinion, the problem is not the silence of Pius XII. The problem lays in the silence of Ambassador Fonseca, as we know. He was exiled in Rome after having led, after having been in a leading position in a foreign ministry at Berlin. And so when he arrives to Rome, he wants to give Hitler the better idea of his work. He wants to give Hitler the idea that is the right man at the right place. So, a possible protest of Cardinal Maglione during the roundup of Roman Jews means a failure in his diplomatic work in the Vatican. That's the reason why he asked Maglione not to report to Hitler that dramatic conversation. So when the pious question blasted in 1964, thanks to the deputy, and thanks also to a book, the first book based on German archives, everyone could say that the German archives gave proof that the Pope remained silent. And the following reports by Fonseca to Berlin are very gentle. The Vatican will not protest. Everything is going okay. There's no problem. This was simply false, because the situation was just in other. I don't know, but maybe the opening of the Vatican archives on this point will give further elements about the work in the Secretary of State soon after that dialogue.
Can I say something to von Weizsäcker more? I think it's correct what you say, completely correct. And I think that we should look even deeper to those documents we have already at disposal in the Acte Document, and you see continuously von Weizsäcker lying or not responding, but continuously, and not only on the topic of the Jews that were deported. A year later, still the Vatican asks, Malione asks again, where is that train? Yeah, a year later, they were already dead. And von Weizsäcker doesn't know nothing. And he says, I will inform myself with Berlin again. But there never came an answer. And in many dossiers it was like that. So they just played a game of, the silent wall, as you... The silent wall.
The real silent man is von Weizsäcker.
Professor.
I have to interrupt for a moment. I'm coming back. Sorry, physical desire.
Should we make a break or?
Should we break for 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's wait for break. We'll break for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Professor Husson, I know you wanted to bring up a point.
Yes, I think it was very good that we started with October 16, 1943. But what we have seen is that we very quickly came to the question of the different manipulations. You have the manipulations of the West, the manipulations of the fascist regime, of Weizsäcker, and then later of the communists, and then you said some Catholic authors later. So I think it would be important now that we come back really to what really happened, because we have to speak about the facts. The problem is that the facts about Pius have been really under a whole set of layers accumulated with every generation, with every political agenda, and perhaps we could come back to, as Leopold von Ranke said, to the real facts, to what actually happened.
Right, and this is very, very important in clarifying this time period. In fact, I think you wanted also to comment on, I think, on Aldo Bernacci. There was a very, very important thing, which I'm going to mention, that under his very window, Susan Zuccotti interviews Aldo Bernacci. And I want to point this out because I will never forget it. And he says that Bishop Nicolini called me into his office, and he's sitting behind the desk. This is the interview from Aldo Bernacci, and he said, and he's holding up a piece of paper. He says, I have here a letter from the Holy Father to do everything we can to save the Jews. So Zuccotti says to him, he said, well, did you read the letter? He says, no, the Bishop was on his side of the desk. He said, so you never actually read the letter? He says, no, I didn't. He says, well, then that means there's no excuse, no reason it actually existed. Even though those letters, which went all over, they were ordered to burn the letters, because if they had fallen into enemy hands, would have jeopardized the neutrality of
and they trusted the Pope.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Don Aldo Bernacci gave an interview years later, when he was still living, to Inside the Vatican, absolutely affirming the truth that Pope Pius XII sent those letters. He has no doubt it was authentic, and he absolutely categorically rejects any stories otherwise suggesting that it was a fabrication or a lie or anything like that. So Aldo Bernacci himself, who was honored by Yad Vashem as a righteous Gentile, himself was very favorable to Pope Pius XII, and he has no doubt whatsoever that the directions and the orders came straight from the Pope.
We'll talk about facts.
Yes. First of all, we have to consider that Pius XII pontificate was a very hierarchical pontificate. So it doesn't make sense that such a hierarchical pontificate has an anarchical situation in which everyone opens everywhere the monasteries, convents, and so on without papal orders. This is the first nonsense. The second one, the second remark is regards Donaldo Brunacci. I met Donaldo Brunacci in 2004, and we have had a long video interview, very, very long. And he, when I asked him, okay, explain me this question of the secret letter of rescue sent by the Vatican. And he said that it was true. He confirmed he saw it. And he confirmed that it was Bishop Nicolini, the Bishop of Assisi, to have shown him. But without handing him over, because it was too much dangerous, and possibly the document eventually was to be destroyed for security reasons. As a matter of fact, all the Jews in Assisi were saved, all. And Brunacci, together with Father Nicacci and Bishop Nicolini, were awarded with the title of righteous among the nations. Father Brunacci added one interesting thing. I saw that document on the 3rd week of September. So it was soon after September 8th, the armistice. And I checked the calendar, and in my opinion, this document is dated between 9 and 16 September. The problem is, does it exist some record, for instance, number of protocol, register about this document, about this orders? I can only say that 10 years ago, 11 years ago, the former Secretary of State, it was Cardinal Bertone, showed me the great book, a protocol book, in which, by his own opinion, there was a record of those orders, a protocol record of those orders. But it was too much speedy, because we were under cameras, we were under many journalists, many interviewers, so it was very, very speedy. I had no time to ascertain if effectively that document existed really. So, in my opinion, one interesting point about the next opening of archives on March 2, 2020 could be the existence or not of this document. Brunacci had no reason to lie. What's the reason? Why? That he operated in silence. He operated as other cases. He could say briefly, okay, we knew there were papal order or Vatican orders without giving further explication. No, Brunacci insisted on this point. I saw the order, and I have no reason to lie. Mm-hmm. That's why.
But then I have a very practical question. Should we exclude the possibility that some of these documents, since they were highly explosive, that they weren't recorded, that they weren't so official?
Yeah, there was a lot of verbal communication.
There has been a lot of verbal communication.
Yeah,
there has been a lot of messages and messengers too. So I think we should be cautious before coming to the definitive statement about that.
Right.
Just a question.
we don't have to have paper documentation for every intervention. Monsignor Carol Abing, who I mentioned before, wrote his book, But for the Grace of God, I believe in the 1960s, in which he says, after the German occupation of Rome, word passed from the Vatican to one convent, to one monastery, to the next. So a lot of these communications were not written down. Some of them we have documented. We now have diaries, we now have firsthand testimony. We can point to other things like such as that. And we have the Nazi documents and so forth attacking the Pope. But many of these interventions, which would be logical for any kind of rescue operation, were done orally, not out in the open, not officially. I mean, it would not have been wise from either a strategic or moral standpoint, because it could have backfired, and sometimes it did when the Nazis found documents that were incriminating, for the Pope to do everything open and official. I mean, this is the thing that a lot of his critics do not understand. They had this idea that the Pope could have operated with ease out in the open, when in fact, if he had acted the way they did, it would have exploded and it would have backfired in a hideous way. You know, they talk about, well, there were 1,000 or 2,000, over 1,000 Jews that still were deported to Auschwitz, not mentioning the 7 to 8, perhaps 10,000 Jews that survived. And one last point, it is a theory that if the Pope had acted a different way, something could have been different. It is a fact that over 80% of Italian Jews survived. No theory ever stands up to a fact. So I don't think it.
Just really quick, confirming what other people said here, is that we know now that early, like 1939, the resistance inside of Germany got a message to the Allies about German troop movements.
Yes.
And we know that it's not in any Vatican archives. We know that we found that in the British archives. So there was, as far as we know, no paperwork was kept inside of the Vatican, but they have it.
It's also what Mark Riebling said yesterday.
Mark has a lot of that.
Mark did all his research in the British and American archives to write the Book of Church of Spies. You will not find one scrap of evidence in the Vatican archives that the Pope was part of was aware of every assassination attempt against Hitler. I wanted to ask you, you did so much research on the Jews of France and so on, and the bishops and so on. Did you see any documentation or anything, or when the bishops discussed, did they say they received a verbal message, or did you ever see any documents telling the bishops to?
Oh yes, they receive, first of all, I say they sign like a signal from the Pope. For example, the encyclic Mit Brand the Soul, at the beginning. Yeah. And you have also in Radio Vatican, they have message, and they know the Vatican is against racism and has denounced the racial laws of the totalitarian state. So they know about this, and they have many impact on the not only bishop but also Catholics, publics in France. So it's very important, and also you have a network. Special network, for example, in Limousin, with the Bishop Rastouille. It explicitly, it marked in the document that there was a special network for rescuing Jews, and it was asking for try to order this network by the Vatican. So it explicitly marked on the documents.
Yeah. How many, would you say, the percentage of Jews of France survived?
How many?
Of all the Jews of France at the time of the Holocaust, how many survived?
Oh, 200.
Because we know that 80% of the Jews of
yes,
in Italy
about 220,000.
75%.
75%. It's the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, but you can
Thank you
look
for the
on
interpretation.
And Professor, yesterday, Professor referred to the great book by Henri de Lubac, Cardinal, Christian Resistance Against Anti-Semitism, 1940 to 1944, which is in English, and it is an excellent text showing how a priest rescuer like de Lubac was deeply involved in these rescue efforts, and how the resistance in France relied heavily on the Vatican and the popes and Vatican Radio, which was authorized by the Pope, to inspire them to rescue Jews. Yeah. And Professor did a wonderful job of building upon that with all her new research on her books that are on the record. Yeah.
To reply to your question regarding the numbers of the French Jews, according to the protocols of the Wannsee conference, they expected 865,000 Jews to live in France, and more than 200,000 survived. So these are the figures we have.
So about 600,000 didn't.
No.
Many migrated to other places.
75% of Jews living in France before the German occupation survived. So it wouldn't fit with the figures, and you cannot take the figures of the Wannsee conference seriously. These were estimations by the Nazis. So no, we have to be cautious about that. I think that what is important here is to understand that, as I said yesterday, there were two aspects. There were the commitment of civil society, and let us give an extraordinary example, which is not so well known, which is Berlin. In Berlin, since the population was very much anti-Nazi, there may have survived up to 10,000 Jews until the end of the war, at least 7,000. But we miss a thorough study of that. So you see, even in Berlin, with the commitment, with the civic commitment of people resisting the dictatorship, it was possible. On one side. On the other side, what is extremely important is that the way the direct occupation or not of the Nazis, and also Hitler's direct influence on that, because if you take France, this is somewhere between the different types. The German army is there, but until very late, the SS and the Gestapo are not so active. So we have to stress, and it was wonderfully explained by Limor Yagil yesterday, that yes, many bishops, many lay people were committed to rescuing, hiding, protecting Jews. In these networks which you have been describing, on one side. On the other side, France was lucky enough not to have a too hard intervention, direct intervention of the Wehrmacht or of the SS, because the major difference between France and Italy is that there was, in France, there was not such a strong institution as the papacy able to block the politicians wanting to collaborate with the German persecution. This is a major difference. So the French Jews were lucky in comparison to others. I gave the example of the Netherlands, and we really, this comparison is very important because it will bring us back to the fact that the commitment of the Pope and the strength of the papacy made the survival of Italian Jews possible in spite of the fascist regime. Right. I think this is very important.
And also in Poland too, if you go to Yad Vashem today, it's a huge number of people that have been recognized by the Israelis in righteous monk who have Polish names. These are Polish Catholics who saved them. But there is an interesting point that the Professor Husson, his family, you actually have some of your family who were bishops and so on, members of the family who saved Jews.
Yes, I just said yesterday, but Limor knows that.
You know so I said his genes are fantastic.
No. This has nothing to do because they were free, so they were not married.
So, they could have been uncles. Or
one is my great uncle. Was the bishop of Blois, Monseigneur Rodolan, and another one was my great uncle, the Archbishop of Rouen. I just mentioned it yesterday for one reason, and I think this is very important for the memory of these events. Yeah. Is that in my family, this was, well, We knew that. But none of these people, well, Monseigneur Rodelin passed away in 1944, as far as I remember. But Monseigneur Petit-Juleville, it's the same. None of these people would have thought this was something extraordinary. So they seldom mentioned it explicitly. It was part of the family story. And then we come back to the 1960s, where you have this very powerful political statements about collaboration and the civil society doing nothing and so on. And the very low voice of family memory is nothing against the powerful noise, I would say, of the political statements.
Yeah.
We have to keep it in mind.
You know, you just brought something to mind which Michael would remember, and Michael and I are very great devotees to Father Peter Gumpel, as is Bill Duino, a very close friend. And I quote him all the time when I speak about this. And Father Gumpel's relatives are in Germany, and they would say, the young nieces and nephews would say, had we been there, we would have done a lot more to help save the Jews. And Peter Gumpel is such a gentleman, and he's such a refined person. He said, "You are, of course, entitled to your opinion. However, do not dare tell me how you would react until you were looking into the eyes of death, as we were. You were caught with an unencrypted phone number or something and shot on the site." This is a very, very important factor because, as I mentioned many times in my talk yesterday, the people who were born after the war have a different people who lived during the war. It's a major, major important. You can sit here and read all you want about what it was like living under the Nazi regime, but you have no idea what it was like unless you actually did it. And I can say, thank God I was born after the war, just a little after the war. But this is a very, very important point because you have people who are making comments have absolutely no idea of what what their predecessors were confronted with. And I give the example of a little child who's 3 years old. He's got a paperclip and he's about to stick it into a plug, and his parents say, "Don't do that. This is going to happen," and everything. Until he actually sticks it in and feels what it's like to get an electric shock, you don't know what's going to happen. And the fact is, this is what we're confronted with. We have a generation of people who've created all of this dialogue and all of this information, never experienced war. And many of them have never been in the military. I was in the Army for 6 years. I know what it was like to have somebody shoot at you. My brother, my entire family, as I mentioned, my father fought in the Battle of the Bulge and was wounded and liberated Buchenwald and Utrecht. They had a whole different concept of what it was like compared to all of these people that wrote these books. Now, no idea. Bill.
I just want to give you a couple of examples of that, of how dangerous it was. One of my great heroes is the German philosopher who passed away in 1977, although his widow, Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, is still living at 96 or 97.
Yeah, no, I know.
Right. And Dietrich von Hildebrand was a great anti-Nazi opponent very early on, before anyone. And right when Hitler, even in the 20s, he was warning against the National Socialist movement. And then when he got in power, he immediately left Germany because he was under orders. It became clear that Hitler wanted him assassinated, but he still stayed in Austria even under the threat of death. And while he was there, he was lecturing. And I have an article here from the Jewish Telegraph Agency. I just quote 1 or 2 lines. Vienna Catholic speaker calls anti-Semitism lunacy. Now, we're talking here October 14th, 1936. This is before the war begins. But Professor von Hildebrand is speaking before a group of Jewish and Christian citizens who, of course, are anti-Nazi and want to collaborate against this horrible evil overtaking the world. And Professor von Hildebrand declares, and this is very important because people think that only after Vatican II, and heaven bless Vatican II for all the great things it did do, but only after Vatican II did Catholics understand about the gravity and evil and sinfulness of anti-Semitism. Not true. Speakers yesterday point out, way before that, the Vatican was condemning anti-Semitism. But he says, in 1936, Professor von Hildebrand, and he said it well before that as well, but here he is speaking to a large group, "As a faithful Catholic, I consider every manifestation of anti-Semitism as a crime and an act of lunacy, absolutely opposed to true Christianity." And we switch ahead to 2 years very quickly. There's another report in the Palestine Post right after Kristallnacht in November of 1938, and it says, amazingly, because we always hear The Christian churches did nothing. The Catholic churches were silent. There was no response to Kristallnacht. They sat on their hands as these horrible pogroms against Jews took place. Well, here we have a report, again, from the Historical Jewish Press, the Palestine Post, today's Jerusalem Post, dated December 1st, 1938, not too long after Kristallnacht, saying, according to the Berlin correspondent of a Yiddish daily, Haint it was called, or H-A-I-N-T, special Catholic masses for the Jewish people of Germany were held at the time of the pogroms in the congregations, in the churches in Berlin. The Jewish people under persecution were referred to as these most unfortunate people, and as a result of this daring act, 50 Catholic priests were arrested by the Gestapo. Now, we never hear about these things, but this just goes to show that A, there was a Catholic and other Christian resistance to Nazi evil, even before the war, even before the Holocaust got into full gear. And number two, obviously they were doing this because they were imbued and were receiving this from the true, authentic teachings of Christianity. So I just wanted to get that on the record. That's just a fraction of many examples, like I said.
Yeah.
And we're not trying to erase all those Christians who failed the Jews or who were guilty of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. We're simply pointing out, also talk about the heroic ones. Don't forget the heroic ones.
I think that we'd like to maybe get to a few of the questions that we
Right.
Let me quickly add one detail.
No.
But already in 1928, March 25, 1928,
Yes.
the Holy Office,
Yes.
today the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, condemned without exception any hate against the God-chosen people, a hate which is commonly known as anti-Semitism. So long before the Second Vatican Council, 1928, long before Hitler came in power, long before Kristallnacht, anti-Semitism was officially condemned by the Catholic Church.
Yes.
And we have all the statements from the 1930s, early 1930s, considering the National Socialism a heresy, which is the worst word you can use to condemn a false doctrine, a heresy, not a heresy against the Catholic belief. And we have a very, very strong document which was released by the Holy See in 1938, which is called the Anti-Racial Syllabus, which was directly and directed against, I quote again, quote, the extremely pernicious defamations and doctrines of racism. Can you have a clearer condemnation of racism?
Yeah, we have one. There's a question. I want to do a couple of these questions, and I think because you were an advisor to Yad Vashem and to the Holocaust Memorial in Washington. This question is from Gabriela Kusner from Princeton University, and she said, "Why does Yad Vashem in Israel, the Holocaust Museum, have such a negative portrayal?"
It's
Pius
maybe,
XII.
I can answer upon
He knows
this,
because he actually went and negotiated. He had the meetings in Israel with Tornielli. We're all going to answer this.
I know also by my experience. So it's became once because originally in Israel or I don't know, Jewish have don't have faith in the church, in the Catholic Church. So this is regularly. And after that, they think that maybe the church want to convert the Jews. So it's another question. And after that, they have a long tradition, which I think it's begin with a book of Shaul Friedlander about P12. So it's a long tradition against P12, P11. So. And it's very difficult to change position in the Yad Vashem, but it began to change.
It has started changing,
Yes.
And this is very important. And Professor Napolitano went to Yad Vashem with Andrea Tornielli, with Minerva was there and a few others, where they actually, and he brought a whole pile of documents. Was Professor Orvieto there?
Yes,
She was there as well.
Professor Yael Orvieto, yes.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting point because the work was the effect of a controversy between the Jerusalem nunciature and the Israeli government on one hand and Yad Vashem on the other. It was a very difficult question because a man, a visitor at Yad Vashem, discovered the caption on Pius XII, Yad Vashem kept. And he reported, I don't know why, but he reported this fact to the nunciature in Jerusalem, and this gave birth to a series of problems of understanding between the Vatican and Yad Vashem. So an unofficial delegation was formed in order to study on a scientific basis upon documents the figure of Pius XII in order to see if a step beyond could be done in order to understand on the diplomatic and historical point of view this Pope. And we brought documents. It was on the eve on the visit of Pope Ratzinger in Jerusalem. It was 3 months 3 months to the we were 3 months to the visit. It was in March 2009, and the visit should be done on May 2009. So the point was also a diplomatic one, because the Pope could not visit a pavilion in Yad Vashem where a strong critic on predecessor of him was written clearly. Ratzinger was a head of state, so he couldn't afford the risk of being criticized by the fact of having visited the pavilion of Pius XII. Anyway, I wrote all this in a book entitled The Vatican Files. There is a full chapter on this negotiation. And so we work upon documents with a great sense of friendship, of understanding, and curious each other to discover when we had as documents, as testimonies, as evidences about the Pope. At the end of the day, we produced together a book printed in Yad Vashem about Pius XII and the Holocaust. And discussion was continued soon after the conference and soon after the visit of Ratzinger. And in July 2012, the caption was changed. So if you want to know why Yad Vashem has so a negative opinion on Pius XII, I can answer that this is no more. It's not such a negative opinion. The the previous caption was worse, much worse.
Oh, much worse.
I have some news to add on just very briefly. 10 years ago, one of the most highly respected Holocaust researchers in the world, who's still, I believe, at Yad Vashem, this is Dr. Ayal Needham Orvieto. She wrote it right after those discussions took place. This was in the Yad Vashem Jerusalem Quarterly Magazine, January 2010. And she spoke about the discussions, and in her article, she mentioned three things. She went back and forth. She described the criticisms and also the supports, but she did say what came out of those meetings was a much more direct evidence of a much more direct involvement of the Holy See in the rescue of Jews, Rome's. What also came out was a much clearer understanding of Pope Pius XII's absolute aversion to National Socialism and Nazism, which he considered one of the worst heresies of the modern age, as Dr. Hesseman has talked about often. And finally, very importantly, what came out is that branding him, quote, an anti-Semite must be called into question. And that was 10 years ago. And just a little bit of update, which is very exciting. Just this past May, I happened to tune into a webinar where Dr. Needham Orvieto spoke for a full hour on Pope Pius XII. And to make a long story short, just as several speakers did yesterday, referencing the famous story now of the Jewish refugee known as Howard Hines Whistler, who was embraced by Pius XII and said to be proud to be a Jew, and he offered his help to his shipwrecked Jewish refugees. She herself, in the course of her conversation, spent 5 or 6 minutes praising that story, which I think I first brought to public attention. And at the very end of it, she says, she calls it a very, very important story, and she says that this whole testimony goes against the whole idea of the pontiff being, a cold, aloof pontiff, and she says any fair evaluation of Pacelli's pontificate has to take new research like this into consideration. So I applaud the doctor, and I have hope for Yad Vashem.
There's also something I had to give. I gave a lecture up in Rochester once, and there's a fellow who's got 2 doctorates, one from La Sapienza University and one from Harvard University in history, and he's got his expertise in the Holocaust studies. And he actually interviewed, this is your story about, because the Italian Red Cross rescued these people and then took them to Campania. He interviewed the captain of the ship. It's amazing how things come together. And then there were 2 people, Winslow, but also Herskovitz wrote a book.
There was a second witness.
He wrote a book about how the Pope saved his life.
If I could quote a passage from a dispatch by Dr. Pertzweig. It is kept in the Yad Vashem archives. I quote, from Islay in London to Pacelli in Rome, to say nothing of the anonymous priests in France, Holland, and elsewhere, they have done some very notable things for us. This is an official from a Jewish agency. And this file is kept in the Slovakia collection at Yad Vashem archives.
And I have to add one thing about Yad Vashem. I was in Yad Vashem in November, 2 months ago, in preparation of this event. And I looked at the actual placard, how it is today. And first of all, there are rumors and claims it is the Hall of Shame. Right. There is no Hall of Shame in Yad Vashem. This Hall of Shame does not exist. It's fake news. So it is in a room which is documenting many efforts to help Jews, including examples of Catholic bishops in Italy helping Jews to survive the Holocaust. And then we have the placard with Pius XII, which is very neutral, saying, well, some people say he did not openly protest, some people say that he did it to protect a lot of Jews, and the answers are still open. We wait for the documents to be released, the archives to open. That's it. So it's a very neutral placard there right now, and I could live with it.
Professor Rishlak, I'd like to bring you in for 1 second. There was a very famous rescuer honored by Yad Vashem who died not too long ago, I had an opportunity to speak to him, and Professor Rychlak interviewed him and spoke. This is the great Tibor Baranski, who worked with Raoul Wallenberg and Angelo Rata, who I believe is also declared righteous among the Gentiles, in Hungary to rescue Jews. And when I myself and Professor Rychlak interviewed him and spoke, he absolutely testified, and I like Professor Rychlak take over from here, that he saw 2 handwritten letters directly from Pius XII ordering the Catholics in Hungary to do everything they could to rescue the Jews.
Well, that's right. But again, it's a secondhand. It's him seeing it, but there's no reason to question him. Right. He's been honored as a righteous among Gentiles. He said he saw the handwritten letters that were from the Pope, and they were orders to rescue Jews. Right. So, you know, I had a televised debate some years ago about this matter, and people always question if you don't have the paper, but the papers couldn't always be saved.
Yeah, but I think we're turning around a point which is often overseen. I already indicated that in my refugee article, and all the nuncios that are among the righteous and their collaborators, diplomats of the Vatican, of whom are they depending? Of the Pope. A diplomat of the Holy See
is a diplomat of the Pope.
Is a diplomat of the Pope. Is a right-hand collaborator of the Pope in a country, in a territory.
So even if he didn't have the letter, you would...
He's executing orders, right. Nothing else. So if you know the logics of diplomacy, and this is in all the countries, I mean, a diplomat knows that he has to do the agenda of the government and the president, the king, whatever. Yeah. Now, for the Holy See, it is the Pope. Yeah, and a nuncio or his collaborators, they have to act along the agenda of the Pope. Now, if you have some nuncios like Roncalli, like as righteous in Yad Vashem already, I must. You know, a little bit, I was astonished always. I must smile with all the critics on them, because I say, but then you don't understand nothing of diplomacy of the Vatican. Because these people were acting for someone, because someone wanted them do this. And so, if they are saving even one Jew, it was the Pope saving one Jew.
Right.
Because if not, they had the order not to do so. It's clear. If the Holy See, and that is pure logic, it's not, you know, that I'm working in the Secretary of State or something that I know these things. It's logic. It's human logic. Yeah. If the Holy See would have had the minimum problem by saving Jews, there must have been an order not to do so.
Right.
And in all the countries, in Holland, in Hungary, in Slovakia, in Poland, and in France, all over Europe, there is not one order as such found until now which says that. So, logic, it is the opposite. And we see that in reality, they were saving them, because there are 1, 2, 3, 4 nuncios under the righteous already recognized. Yeah. So, what are we talking about?
Yeah. They were working in such a uniform way that you can look at that. But when you come to the critics, even when Monsignor Hugo Flattery is sheltering Jews and other refugees inside the Vatican, he's not giving credit for it. They're saying, well, the Monsignor must have been doing it on his own. It's ridiculous at some point.
And then I did interview somebody who was saved. We did an interview of, this guy is the head of the Holocaust Center in North Carolina University. His father, Hugo Adler, actually used to rescue Jews. He was a mountain climber. He would take Jews into Switzerland. He was captured by the Nazis and was on a train to one of the camps. He escapes the train with a priest, makes his way down to Rome. He's put into the Vatican for several weeks, 6 weeks. He said, I met the Pope on multiple occasions. And then they sent him through the south of France to Portugal to the Dominican Republic. And it's the most amazing thing that we.
Yeah, but I won't repeat. It is a problem in Yad Vashem. If you have 4 nuncios among the righteous, and you don't have the Pope, who was at the top of that hierarchy to which we.
You praise the servants, but not the master.
I know. Yeah. There are many more. So it is not that point. It is not 4 or 5 or 6. It is 1 or 2. If you have 1 or 2 that are among the righteous, I think that the honor goes to the top.
Absolutely.
It is let me add one point. It's very important. It is like praising the servants, but not the master who ordered. And if you study the documents, and I mean 7,300 pages were already published in 11 or 12 volumes, you find how they work hand in hand. How first Cardinal Secretary of State Maleone contacts the nuncio for first diplomatic intervention. When he calls in the representative or the ambassador of this country in question to the Holy See, and Maleone talks to him in person. Then again they try a diplomatic action, and then at the end the Pope himself is writing to someone like Tiso, the president of Slovakia,
didn't he threaten to excommunicate him?
Or Horthy, the head of state of Hungary. So we have a hand-in-hand action with the nuncio, with the ambassador of the country, and the Secretary Cardinal of State.
Keep it at a logical level. If you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and they depend of point A, this is point A who is acting.
And they even give that testimony.
And that's the point that makes me a little bit, smile, because the people who decided to put
Yad Vashem.
who decided to make among the righteous Roncalli, Rota, and others, I think they missed the ball.
And we have the document.
They missed really the historical ball, because the historical ball says that these people were in fact doing this, while another one said to do so.
And we have the documented evidence that all the action by the nuncio is ordered
If
by
I
the
can add
Vatican.
something about unpublished documents.
I just want to add one very important point. Professor Rychlek and I, back in 2002, contacted the chief assistant of Roncalli, now St. John the 23rd, Loris Capivella, who was later made a cardinal. And Loris Capivella, we have a letter, absolutely declares what Dr. X just said, that of course St. John the 23rd, at that time, Angelo Roncalli, was acting on the clear instructions of the Pope. Not only that, he was the eyes, the hands, and the activity of Pope Pius XII. You cannot honor St. John the 23rd and the other nuncios without honoring the hero, the chief, Pope Pius XII.
Can I add something about the unpublished documents? Hence, the documents the 4 Jesuits of the Acte des Documents decided not to publish in the series. I quote here a letter from the Polish ambassador to the Holy See, Papi. As you know, Papi was very critical after the war. This is not the only one case of Papi. It's not the only one example. I quote, he expresses appreciation for the Holy See's effort toward the Polish deportee. So, hence, even Polish, Jewish, Catholic, Jewish, and so on. And he says, pay attention to this. He writes in France, and I can translate from France directly if I can. Please, I apologize. There are not only the démarche of the Monsignores and of the apostolic delegates, but we speak about, I also talk about of the démarche that you, High Excellence Monsignor Maleone, are doing toward my people. So we come back to the question, top and execution.
Professor Husson, you're going to comment on this, but I also have the next question to you, which is going to be good. But you should comment on this, but shall I give you the question?
First, the comment. I think that Johan made a very important point, which is about the methodology. I think we have to keep in mind that what is happening with the history of Pope Pius is, on one side, quite normal in history, in historiography. You always have some witnesses at the time who really saw what happened, and then you have a memory elaborated for any reason, and which in most cases is distorting the reality. And then after a few decades or many decades, people come back to history. What is really astonishing in the case of Pope Pius is the intensity of the distortion from the 1960s on, and I think we can be happy that it also brought a very strong reaction, pushing towards an acceleration as far as historiography is concerned. So it will start now. So I think that everything which has to do with methodology is extremely important. And since we are entering a new era, which is the era of historiography, thanks to the opening of the documents, we really, and this could be the agenda of our group, I think, we really should put forward what is the right methodology to deal with the topic. And it doesn't mean that you will find only 3 items. Perhaps you will have 30 items to keep in mind. So I think this is a comment I wanted to do, because everything which has to do with methodology, how is a state governed, and what is diplomacy, or how do we come to the figures about the rescuing of victims, or the networks which were really very, very well illustrated yesterday. I think all these aspects should be also prepared, so that when young historians go and visit these archives, and we should encourage some of our students to do that, then they should have in their pocket, I wouldn't say a Bible, but a methodology.
There should be
a real methodology.
Yeah, a methodology. But this question is for you, because they found that, and we actually answered part of it. But it said, could you speak a bit more about why there was such a difference in survival rates amongst the countries?
Yes, I think this is what we have been stressing already. This is a very good question. I think this is about the context, the circumstances, and perhaps I could add something which is very important. We have the view of Nazi totalitarianism as something which was very centralized, very uniform. One of the main guidelines for Adolf Hitler was a differentiated treatment of the regions and countries. According to his plan, he wanted to be the German army and the Nazis to be very harsh towards Eastern Europe, and to be more lenient to Western Europe. As I said, France shouldn't be treated too harshly as long as the war was not over. Because on one side he feared the French people, and we saw that with the resistance. On the other side, he wanted to have the collaboration of a French government. So then he knew exactly what, many contemporaries have underestimated Hitler and his overview of Europe. He knew exactly where he had to be cautious as long as the war was not over. This is very important. So it can explain the different rates of survival in many cases, because the German army or the Gestapo were not so cautious in the Netherlands as they were in France. This is very important.
There's also, they bring up another point. He said that whether the Poles were particularly complicit and whether this was an unfair allegation. Were the Poles, I mean, you know, as far as the survival rates? What happened in Poland?
In Poland, well, you know, first you have to keep in mind that 3 million Jewish people disappeared, were killed in Poland first. Secondly, you have also to keep in mind that 3 million Poles, mainly Catholics, were killed also during the war. Yes. Poland was certainly one of the countries which was treated in the harshest way during the Second World War. You should keep it in mind. Then, well, we are confronted with a very difficult question, which has been really, I think, in the center of too many purely political debates, and it has also to do with current politics in Europe. I would be cautious. Yes, we have many examples of collaboration. Yes, we have many examples of anti-Judaism, Polish anti-Judaism, which was working in the same direction as the Nazis were. But we also have many heroes in Poland, yes. Many writers among the nations, and this was done in the most difficult conditions in Europe. I mean, exactly as in Belarus, in Ukraine, and elsewhere. So I would have a nuanced view at the end.
It also brings me to the next question, because this is actually from Pave the Way's director for Ukraine, who happened to have been there. We, the Ukrainian people, feel the pain of the Jewish people in the Holocaust. Ukrainians lost millions of lives during the Holocaust atrocities, with Stalin, 1932 to 1933, and Hitler, 1944 to 1945. 45 to 46. Do you recognize the similarities between the Holocaust and the...
This is a very, if I may, and then I will leave you the floor. But, you know, I was lucky enough to be part of the research project of Patrick Desbois. So I was myself in Ukraine, and I was taking part in the interviews which were done of witnesses of the Holocaust. First aspect I want to stress is that Ukraine is a very complex country. You cannot compare what happened in Western Ukraine, in Galicia, on one side, and what happened in Crimea and what happened in Eastern Ukraine. It really depends, and the reactions were not the same, first. Secondly, it's true that there was a lot of anti-Judaism, if not anti-Semitism, above all in Western Ukraine. And it's true that there was a lot of suffering in the 1930s in many parts of Ukraine because of Stalinism, Central and Eastern Ukraine. But what struck me in all these interviews we have been conducting is that the witnesses were fully able to make a distinction between the different eras. I never heard one of these witnesses associate the Holocaust with the Ukraine famine in the 1930s. Maybe at the end of the interview, when asked about their conditions of life before the war, they would say something about communist persecution, but without mixing the two aspects. I always found that very striking, because most of these people who were there, the witnesses interviewed by Father Desbois and the Yahadin Unum project, they were teenagers in the time of these horrible killings. They were direct witnesses. This is one of the major discoveries, is that most of these witnesses were standing a few dozen meters from the scene. if not a few meters from the scene. There may have been petty auxiliaries, I would say, just because when it was on the countryside, then they had to help. There would be a car transporting the victims or something like that. They would be requested to help and so on. But it's very important to keep in mind that most of them, even if they have been suffering a lot under Soviet occupation, they were fully able to make a distinction between the victims and not making confusion between themselves as victims of Stalinism and the Jews as victims of the Nazis. Right. It's very important to keep this in mind.
There's a very, very important question which I think everybody can really chime in on, and it's one that we completely avoided. And that was the what they call the hidden encyclical of Pius XI, and it's in your archives, isn't it, Johann? He won't admit it.
There is.
But the fact is,
there is no hidden.
Yeah, it wasn't hidden, but there was an encyclical
that
Pius XI issued, and there's a lot of controversy with that because it dealt directly with the persecution of Jews. Because of and this is what everybody says, well, how come Pius XII did not put this out? And this is a very, very important point because we have the translation of it, vehemently anti-Semitic in nature. It was, and the fact is, had they issued it, had Pius XII issued it as it was written, Hitler would have jumped for joy. Because it blamed the Jews for why. They said, why are they being persecuted? And it actually blamed them for, this is why. Because you've rejected Christ as for the Savior that you've prayed for years, and because of your business practices, and so on. And it has these terrible things. The fact is, at least according to some of our experts, that Pius XII took 2/3 of that encyclical, and he took out the anti-Semitic portions, and he issued it.
Well, just on the point I wanted to elaborate, Father Robert Graham, who was a roommate of Father John Lafarge, who knew a great deal about this. And he said, yes, there were parts of it which were laudable and excellent that condemned the anti-Semitism, but there were other parts. First of all, there were different drafts. There was never one unified encyclical. There was never anything that either Pius XI or Pius XII approved of.
Right. And
heaven forbid that they should have approved of it as it was written and put together, because as you say, Gary, it contained these horrible anti-Semitic comments. And what is particularly alarming is that in a new documentary that I read about, fortunately, hopefully it will not cause too much impression or mislead people, they're giving enormous attention to this, not mentioning that the so-called hidden encyclical, far from being this glorious, clean condemnation of anti-Semitism, is a horribly deformed anti-Semitic document in itself. And as you say, anything good in it would have been ignored by the Nazis. They would have
absolutely highlighted.
And not only that, first of all, during the war, it would have been a catastrophe and helped Hitler even more and confused Catholics. And after the war, after the Holocaust had taken place, it would have made Nostra Aetate, the great document of reconciliation between Catholic Jews, that much more difficult, because the anti-Semites still in the church would have pointed back to that quote, hidden encyclical and said, look, you can't go against previous church teaching. Thank heaven, both Pius XI never gave it his full approval, nor Pope Pius XII. It's a godsend.
The most important thing is here that some authors claim that Pius XII, when he became Pope, or after Pius XI died, when he became the Camerlengo, he made it disappear. This is absolutely not true. Right. We have the testimony of one of the authors, Pater Gundlach, who was a German. And Pater Gundlach said that already in January, when the Pope was still alive, it was sent back to the authors and kept. And they were told, do with it whatever you want, but if you publish it, just never say it was a draft for a papal encyclical. So when Pius XI died in February of 1939, there was no draft on the desk anymore. Pacelli learned about it after his election of the Pope. And then he requested a copy from the Jesuit Courier just to read it. And then he said, okay, the basic idea I include in my encyclical Summus Pontificatus, which was published in October 1939, the idea of humani generis unitas, of the general unity of the human race. But this draft, you can have it back. I don't need it. I can't use it. But it was refused by Pius XI when he was still healthy.
I understood that he actually wrote in the border, "I do not want to use this."
Yeah.
What I would want to say is something on this.
Okay.
The whole matter was very, let's say, also that to smile again, methodological. The book was published and it made an enormous, with an enormous power. A few years later, when I came up to take in hand, the lead of this historical archive of the Secretary of State, at my surprise, I found a fascicle which was closed. But it happens. I mean, things get lost or
The box was stuck in a corner
overseen or
someplace.
whatever. I mean, you never know how come that this thing, was not, let's say, dealt with in the proper way. You never know. So, but I immediately saw that, my God, this is a contribution, and this is a contribution to that same text that should have become the encyclical. But it wasn't seen by the authors of the book. So their book was, in fact, based on, yes, sources, but completely incomplete. Yeah. So there were other researchers of Germany and Austria who continued on the other versions that were sent in that time as, basic material for an encyclical. And there are articles on that. You can read it. And the only thing that I can, let's say, see as a sort of conclusion of their view, because I don't want to go into that what then happened when Pius XII was elected Pope. We will see. That is a good thing, that the archives will be open in a month or so. And we will see also on the hidden basically what is then the end of this story, of this. Yep. But the conclusion of the whole thing is that already at that stage they say exactly what we said here, namely that the different versions, and that what the Jesuits already said before, that the versions were in such a way discordant and not organized. And there was, in fact, there was in particular a very sociological, let's say, view on the problem, which is not apt for theological texts, or texts as encyclicals have a theological tone. Yeah. So they had difficulty also to manage these texts into something common, a complete text that could serve. That is the first thing. And who is, acquainted with the preparation of encyclicals, and it's a long, long way to go to encyclicals, mostly. Genesis of minimum 2-3 years, minimum, if not more.
And many versions.
Yeah, and many versions.
Proposals.
Proposals. And
this is a methodological aspect.
Methodological aspect. I cannot understand that people think that an encyclical is made on 2 texts in 3 months or something, or 6 months. I mean, this is impossible.
If I can, just a little insight to the folks on the other side. John Cornwell in Hitler's Pope blamed Pacelli, as Secretary of State, for writing this anti-Semitic part, and then said as Pope he suppressed it. So he criticized them on both sides, which is just ridiculous.
No, and it is a point, what Michael said, I cannot even approve it. It's Pontificate Pius XII, but it would be a question we can ask ourselves. What will come out? Who disapproved this
we know he did.
This project. I don't say a text, because I don't think there is a text at all. But a project was there, an idea, to maybe make a text of it. But who disapproved, and who was the one not, ready, or who suggested perhaps to the Pope not to do it? I mean, there are so many possibilities.
What we can say is that the great first encyclical of Pope Pius XII, Summa Pontificatus, is strongly anti-racist, strongly anti-Nazi, does not have anything there even beginning to compare to anti-Semitism. So whatever he knew or did not know, he cleaned it up and he issued a powerful, very well-received, great encyclical that was so pleasing to the Allies, they dropped tens of thousands of copies throughout Europe. So anyway, I think it will be very interesting to see
I
what
think
the
that the Germans were not happy with it.
No.
the Germans actually...
The Nazi Germans were not
I think
happy
Owen
with it.
Chadwick, the great historian, actually said...
Catholic Germans were very happy.
Yes.
I think
Catholic Germans were.
some of the Nazis actually tried to edit the entire encyclical to make it appear that it was pro-German. I mean, it's crazy the things they did. But in any event, you're absolutely correct.
But I mean, this is all very important. How an encyclica is being elaborated over many years, or perhaps it was a little it was a little quicker with the Mitbrennender Sorge for obvious reasons. But anyway, this is interesting. The second aspect I just wanted to stress, because this is also obvious, there are so many texts of the different popes published and available on the web, on the website on the Vatican today, and no historian is reading them.
No.
Most of these people, of all the historians we have been mentioning as anti-pious, how many have really read all the texts published by Pius XI, as long as Pacelli was the Secretary of State, of Pius XII himself, and this is all there, and who cares?
How many have
Who
ever
reads that?
gone to the archives?
Yes, but this is
Never even set
still
foot
much
in the
easier
archives.
as the archives.
Yeah. It's online.
It's on the,
But you know,
online.
but there's something interesting point that which they bring up, the opposition brings up, is that they chose Lafarge because he was an expert on the segregation problem in the United States. And that's why they chose him. So they cite this, that he was an expert on why people will, are prejudiced against others. It was the black American population, so on. They're prejudiced against, and that's why he was chosen to do this. But the fact is, this is the product he came up with. But it was during the pontificate of Pius XI, which is open. I mean, our friend said you have a whole folder on this. It's available.
Yeah, later on, Lafarge did, in fact, whatever his flaws during that period in the 40s, publish effusive praise for Pope Pius XII's Christmas addresses, which are completely ignored and which are now understood by everyone to be clear condemnations of the persecution of people based upon their race, which is exactly the essence of the Holocaust.
Times said it.
Right, and the Nazis themselves denounced Pope Pius XII, which is a badge of honor of him, as, quote, a mouthpiece of the Jewish war criminals,
Right.
unquote. And he was also in a very interesting report we came across not too long ago, a few days after the 1942 Christmas address of Pope Pius XII came out. There's this amazing report in the Palestine Post, I think it's dated December 29th, just a few days later, saying that according to the one of the Nazi lead organs, the Vatican Osservatore Romano is being viciously attacked for having just published a document condemning the extermination of the Jews. Now, they must have been it doesn't go into more detail, and that's still unclear what they were referring to. We're looking into this, but it's very interesting. Perhaps they're referring to the Christmas address. They're referring to something, but the point is that the Nazis themselves understood the Pope, as did many of the rescuers, as to be clearly condemning the Nazi genocide against the Jews.
And they refused to send even a delegate when he was enthroned in March of 1939.
Right.
Germany did not send anybody there, because they hated him when he was nuncio.
Right.
Actually, we've answered. The only other question which somebody found was interested is what's the progress of the canonization, which I don't think is very. They said, where is it standing right now? And I think that's, of course, a big secret.
Looking for a miracle.
No, and I understand. What I understand from the rumors from that we keep getting is that in fact they have found something and that they're investigating it now.
Well, I think it's important to note that it's been through the evaluation. They've determined he led a life of heroic virtue. So the theologians and the bishops have approved it to that point. And then the miracle is what...
Blessed, right? Blessed now.
I have a little bit of news on that. Now, I always say I am more than grateful. I would be more than happy to see the historical truth about Pope Pacelli, whatever it is, I believe it will prove to be absolutely favorable, come out. And as I say, the Holy Spirit has his own timetable for the sainthood. But the first things first, I believe, I'm very grateful that all the archives are coming out, because the excuse that was being given, oh, we can't do anything and move forward with the canonization until all of the archives are out, notwithstanding that there's other popes that have been canonized without all their archives. Even so, I have a little bit of news. I know for a fact that from talking to sources that there have been reported miracles, but they're taking, and I think this is good, a careful, painstaking approach. Nobody wants to ram this through. I have complete confidence that when all is said and done, when the dust settles, at some point, Pope Pius XII, who is now venerable, will be beatified and will be saint. It may not come for a long time, but it will come. That's my prediction.
Thank you, Father Duino. Thank you, Father Duino. But you know, there is... Yeah,
it's very important to say we are not a theologian. We are historian. So we must focus, even in order to debate, discuss with other lay historians. Me, myself, I'm a Catholic, but doesn't matter. We should focus on the historical reality, the historical truth about Pius. And the historical truth is coming from the documents. Right. If it will be saints or not, it can be important from a Catholic point of view, but for an historian, the historical truth and the matter is that what documents say now about Pius is quite different, if not the opposite to the Hitler's Pope idea.
Let's get all the truth out. The canonization will take care of itself.
Right, and it is a religious issue. But there is one point that there was no postulator for the cause for a long time, and that does delay things.
I knew the late postulator who passed away. Go ahead.
Yeah, Molinari.
Father Molinari.
Let me make one more remark. We had a question about the percentage of survivors, and there's one fact which has to be considered. That we have in those countries where diplomatic interventions of the Holy See were most successful, we have the highest rates of survivors. Yeah. That's a very important point. Like in Bulgaria, where originally even the parliament decided to deport or to hand over with Bulgarian Jews, about 50,000 between 45 and 55, to the Nazis. And then we had an intervention both from the nuncio, who was the father confessor of the Queen of Bulgaria, who was a Savoy princess before, from Italian background, and from the apostolic delegate in Constantinople, Roncalli, who was the godfather of the prince to the throne, the heir to the throne, to the king. He wrote to the king. So we have this both interventions, and the king decided, no, the Bulgarian Jews have to remain in Bulgaria, and this is what happened. In Bucharest, it was because of the diplomatic intervention of the Holy See that the dictator of Romania decided, Antonescu, not to send the Jews to Germany, but to deport them to an area in Romania called Transnistria, and to exclude all converts, what gave the chief rabbi and the nuncio the possibility to distribute false baptism certificates, and so on. So in those countries where the Holy See, Italy, were under Mussolini, because of the influence of the Holy See, the Jews were not handed over to the Germans. The situation changed after Mussolini became a complete puppet of Hitler after the coup d'etat in Italy in the summer of 1943 and the Germans taking over control in Italy. Then the situation changed. But before, the Jews were safe in Italy, and so on and so forth. So we really have a direct correlation between Vatican diplomacy and the survival rate. So to finish my part, I want to quote a little conversation I had with Pope Francis 1.5 years ago when I handed him over my book. And I said, Holy Father, wouldn't it be a wonderful idea to make Pius XII the guardian saint of all refugees and refugee helpers?
Yes, yes.
And normally in a papal audience, the Holy Father finished every remark by somebody with, please pray for me. But in this moment, he looked me deep into my eyes and said, this is very interesting. Thank you. Yeah. But please pray for me. I said, Holy Father, I'll always pray for you.
And, I might point out that Michael is the one that discovered all the stuff of the Armenian genocide,
yes,
and had given the book to the Pope. And that's where the Pope is as mentioned multiple times.
Pius XII is so relevant to our times. I know people of goodwill can and do disagree about what to do about so many refugees and the situations throughout America and Europe. But one thing is clear. Pope Pius XII published one of the most important documents ever about refugees, and he spoke about it many times, and it's quoted today. So he basically put on the record the charter of, that the Vatican follows today when it speaks out so strongly. Now again, the Pope himself has recognized that each country has to make a prudential decision, but all people, however they're treated and however this is dealt with, should and must be treated with compassion, with humanity, respecting their human rights. And we owe that a large degree to Pope Pius XII. And that's why I think Pope Francis' eyes lit up when Michael told him that. I hope that inspires him to press ahead.
Well, 2 months later, he declared, or 3 months later, he declared he would open the archives.
Oh, wow, this is great.
He reads German, so...
Well, I don't know, is there anything else you think you'd like to discuss, or...
Well, I just wanted to say, I just think, I expressed my views very clearly. I think we should follow the evidence wherever it leads. I have always said, if something were to appear against Pope Pius XII or someone else, I would have to admit, I'd have to be the first to admit. But now, will the critics of Pope Pius XII, will they admit, if things turn out the way that many of his supporters believe they will they admit that they have been completely wrong for so many years?
They won't.
I don't think they will.
No, they will not. And this is something we actually turned out that we have one thing. I have an interview I sent out about in 1979. I sent you the link to a KGB operative who talks about how they are, the KGB operates to send disinformation, but actually to destabilize the United States. And he says in this, right off the bat, he says they've been actually doing this for 60 years. And they interview, this is a 1984 interview. He says, is there anything we could do to stop it? He says you would have to start right now, and it will take you 40 years to reverse it, because what you've now got are the kids who are now professors, are the grandchildren of those that they actually influenced years ago, and now you have all the schools. It's going against patriotism, it's going against history, and it's diverting it. But one thing that he says in this, and he says that they call them useful idiots. He says, when we come into a country, and this is 1984, we went to Nicaragua, we went to elsewhere. He says, his name is Yuri Bezmenov, if you want to, Bezmenov, look him up and just hear what he says. He said, no matter what you say, no matter what documents you can show, you will never change their mind, never. He says, but when we come in, and the way he puts it, he says, and we come in there, and he says, and our boots are on their balls, then they see it. And what do? They riot. So the first thing we do, the Russians do, is that we take all of the useful idiots and we shoot them. When we come in and take over power, we kill them. And he gives an example of this. He said, this is what we did in these different countries. And the reason he defected in 1979 was that he was looking at a list, and one of his best friends, who was a left-leaning, pro-Soviet journalist, was on a list to be eliminated, to be killed. And so he says, this is ridiculous. And what he says in this 1984 interview, he says, I was able to come here to the United States. Where are you going to go when this country has now when they've completely destabilized the country? But you can see the changes, and he predicts everything that's happening, that you see happening. That's a very unfortunate thing, but if you see Yuri Bezmenov, just listen to it. Yeah.
Just perhaps as a personal conclusion to all these discussions of these 2 days, I think we come again and again to the same picture, is that without all what has been undertaken, Nostra Aetate wouldn't have been possible. So they handled first, and then they spoke about what had been done, which was the logical consequence. And since I think the question of relations between Christians and Jews is very important to us all. I think we could quote to end the discussion, or at least my part of the discussion. I would say this is exactly what you have when the Hebrews are at Mount Sinai. What do they say? Yeah. We will do and we will listen. Yeah. And I think this is essential. This is something essential in the Bible. Handle first and then speak. Right. We will do and we will listen. This is the answer they give to the speech of Moses.
I just want to say, I was very moved yesterday. I know how emotional and intense this whole debate has become and has been, but I was so moved yesterday when, at the conclusion of the great United Nations event, there was that moment of silence, remembering all the tragic victims of the Nazis, so many countless Jewish individuals.
And Catholics. And priests. And everybody.
And gypsies and many other.
Right, homosexuals, everything.
That's correct, who died. I just felt, with a world that's so divided and so polarized, just to see that happen was very moving to me. I will never forget that. And that's the kind of unity and hope and spirit that we should all take from this discussion, not in hostility or intensity or anger, rather serenity, peace, careful review of the evidence, looking toward the future, and always doing so in conjunction and promoting good Catholic, Jewish, and also Muslim relations.
Absolutely.
For the entire world. And thank your organization for doing so much in that regard.
I'm going to tell you something my mother taught me as a very, very young. And she said to me, she says, the definition of intelligence is somebody who knows how little they know. That's what my mother taught me. And it's true.
Yes.
And know when they are
and, and the fact is, that's when you said, will they admit that they're wrong? And the answer is they will not.
Well,
if they
And now when the archives open, the time for truth has come. And you can't hide behind something like, don't bother me with the facts.
Yeah.
I already made up my mind.
You're entitled to your opinion, but not your facts.
Look at the documents. If you want to find out the truth, look at the documents. Now we all have the opportunity to study them. Thanks God, thanks to the Holy Father.
Yeah, Ron.
And so I hope the time has come for a complete re-evaluation of the wartime activities.
I think this will be one of the great moments in Pope Francis's pontificate.
It's very true.
I am so grateful for the Pope, and God bless him.
Yeah, Ron.
I was just going to say, as a lawyer and law professor, one of the things you look at the evidence, you be aware even documents can be, in this debate, documents have been doctored. But look at the opposition, and when you see ellipses being used to bad translations, doctoring photographs, when you see manufactured evidence on the first sign someone has a horrible case is when they doctor the evidence, and there's been a lot of that on the other side.
Absolutely, but there is something that we'll point out what happened when we had our event at the Sorbonne, and I'm not going to mention his name, but there was a noted church historian who quoted, he said, "I never allowed documents to form my history." And you know what I'm saying? We never permit documents to be formed. He gets it from mist from the sky.
Documents.
This is a constantly quoted historian.
Didn't he deny that later?
He did deny it until I said, "Let me send you the videotape." and Edward, he said, and everyone's laughing at him. We have an entire room. Everyone's laughing at him, and he says, "Thank you for your postmodernistic position on history."
And Professor Rychlak, one last point, and we began the discussion about the October 16th raid. I think you were one of the first to point out, if not the first, that right in the Vatican's own acts and documents, there is a clear note where I think it's Cardinal Montini meets with Pope Pius XII, and Pope Pius, it's clear that he talked about what we should do about sheltering a persecuted Jewish family, and it's clear from the notation that the Pope gives his full approval to rescue them and protect them. But because they didn't understand the Vatican's language in the code.
The Vaticanese.
Right, the Vaticanese.
Very special
they denied
language.
This.
Yeah.
So here we have official documentation of the Pope giving his approval, and it's ignored because they don't even understand
They don't
the Vatican
understand. We have one
diplomacy.
document, I think Michael found it, where it said to, and one of the Pope is speaking, he was Secretary of State at the time.
Right.
And he's speaking to somebody, he says, Monsignor, you got to learn to read between the lines. You know, the Vatican spoke in a very, like the documents from Kristallnacht. They didn't come out and say it. They said it with Latin and everything else and innuendo. You got to learn to read between the lines. And that's what we had discussed. Vaticanese was a very important topic because you'll have people, historians who have no knowledge at all on how this institution works, who come up with a different conclusion based on what they read.
Yeah, and especially during the war, because it becomes not only Vaticanese, but diplomatic silence.
And it's deciphered. It's stuff that had to be put into code.
People knew
So
that every word counts.
I recommend a dictionary, Vaticanese English.
Hey, you didn't finish your story about the St. Louis.
Oh yeah, there's one thing that we did want to say, because we were talking about the St. Louis, and Ron reminded me was that this was a ship full of Jews that were coming from the continent. We talked about the United States, and the fact is that nobody seems to blame Roosevelt for some of this stuff, but I can give you multiple other things. We were talking about one institution, but when they brought St. Louis came to the United States, and they did not let it land, and these people were sent back to Europe, to the concentration camps. And I understand there's a letter. My friend said that he saw it, that he has a copy of it. I haven't gotten it yet. Where Pacelli writes to, Pius XII writes to, it was Pacelli was at the time, and he writes to President Roosevelt, and he says, how dare you send these poor, unfortunate people back to the camps? How dare you do it? And there's also there's a legend about that. The fact is, and I'm going to...
Don't you have a video also in that same ballpark of Monsignor Ferrofino talking about Pius XII's emotional disappointment and anger?
Why don't the Americans understand? Why don't the British, the Spanish see? We must save this vibrant community. Right. This is what he said.
He's trying to save the Jewish community and get them visas to go to Dominican
that's a
Republic.
whole different story.
Right,
I don't know if we have the time for that, but I'll tell you. Go to the website. You'll see Monsignor Ferrofino. It's in Italian, and it was incredible because he was physically, and that's why I said when we were talking about the Pincus Lapida estimated how many Jews were saved. He had no idea what this was going on, and he had no idea. Many of the 11,000 Jews were sent to the Dominican Republic, 800 people at a time through the Dominican Republic, and this priest did it. But they're gone now. They were all, they were over 100, the 103 when he died. My wife always says, because they're not married, that's why they live so long. But the fact is,
I just want to say, in a month and 5 days, we have millions of documents on this and many other things. And
he's giving us hints.
We'll see what comes out.
Let's take vacation before going to the documents.
Okay, next time.
One last point. I did ask Sir Martin Gilbert, who did as much research as imaginable as any person before he died. I said, do you agree with the Vatican statement on the show on the Holocaust that the Catholic Church under Pope Pius XII, not Pope Pius XII himself all alone, but the entire church working in union and under his directions, do you agree with the estimate that the Catholic Church did in fact save hundreds of thousands of Jews? And he said, this is from one of the great Holocaust historians of all time, yes, I agree with that estimate. So people who say that they wildly exaggerate,
his interview was on my website. I interviewed him.
You did. That's right.
We interviewed him.
I interviewed him.
And he is the one that said, Gary, and he said this to me. He says, Gary, you must get righteous. He must be righteous among nations. And he told me I have to, and I did. We did about 8 years ago. All the documentation, but nobody's looked at it yet.
The numbers are about between 800,000 and 960,000 Jews.
Right. In 1945.
Were saved because of the actions, the more than 40 diplomatic interventions on a large international scale, a lot of smaller ones, survived due to the actions of the Holy See under Pius XII.
And that's 4 million today, and there are only 16 million Jews in the entire world. That's 25% of the world's Jewish population today is alive because of the actions of this Pope under this pontificate.
Thank you. I want to add something. In my opinion, in my personal, as a personal conclusion, we say that there is plenty of documents about Pius. There are documents from abroad, non-Vatican sources. There are documents from Jewish sources. And these documents, this mass of documents has already built a certain historical truth about documents, about Pius, that it's quite different from the Iterus Pope approach. The second point is the Acte Document, the series, which is published since a long time. Okay, it's not an apologetic series. It's a series with only limit we can put in the methodology and so on, but it's a series with a mess of documents from Vatican sources, but even from foreign sources and Jewish sources. And if this series continues to be ignored, one cannot build an alternative truth, historical truth. The historical truth about Pius XII is built by the existing document. Ignorance is not admitted, like in law. Ignorance is not admitted.
And theory is not a fact. I just want to, I love that statement. Ignorance is not, will not lead us anywhere, and neither will speculative conjecture or theory. We need to look at the evidence and assess the evidence and weigh it, and then proceed from there.
Next year in Jerusalem. Thank you very, very much for everybody coming and for doing it.
It's very fruitful, and thank you.
Yeah, this video is going to be much more as important as what we did yesterday, because we actually go into depth in a lot of stuff we could not cover yesterday because of timing.
Wonderful.
What?
Wonderful. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Pleasure to meet you.